Sabia Wade is a Black queer CEO, investor, author, educator, full spectrum doula, and expander of Black luxury. Sabia is the founder of Birthing Advocacy Doula Trainings, an accessible and inclusive training program for community care workers, and For the Village, a nonprofit providing doulas at no or low cost to low income and marginalized communities in San Diego. As a coach, board member, investor, educator, and programming development consultant for organizations throughout the birth and reproductive health industry, every part of Sabia's work centers on liberation of all people through reproductive justice. Her newest business, Loads of Pride, is a new frontier in the trucking industry, centering jobs for BIPOC and queer individuals, and aims to show just how connected it all is. Her book, Birthing Liberation: How Reproductive Justice Can Set Us Free, is now available for purchase. Welcome to the podcast, Sabia.
Well, thank you for having me. Also for I feel like there's been like schedule changes and you've been like rocking with it. So
Oh, no
so
worries.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Yes, I completely understand scheduling changes.
Yeah.
So, will you share with us your pronouns and where you're joining us from today?
Yes, my pronouns are she, they. Either is fine. And I am currently located right outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Nice.
Not that anyone even knows that sometimes because I'm always everywhere. People are like,
Totally.
"Are you still in San Diego?" And I'm like, "No." "Are you over here?" I'm like, "No, I'm just everywhere, nowhere at all."
Right, right. You're omnipresent.
Mhm.
I love it. So, what is the story that led you to do the work you're doing today? You're doing so much as a CEO, investor, author, educator, full spectrum doula, and my favorite, expander of Black luxury. And I would love to know more about that. That's so
Um,
cool.
let's see. I mean, there's like always origin story, but the funny part is, I was on Facebook,
Mhm.
of course, and Facebook shows you all these memories,
Right.
right? And like I had a memory from like 11 years ago, either 11 or 12 years ago, and I wasn't even a doula yet.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm not delusional, I'm an entrepreneur, right? And like,
Hmm.
so that's always been something that's been like center for me. I didn't know
Yeah.
how. I didn't know the how, but I always knew the what, I
Hmm.
guess.
Hmm.
Even when it didn't exist, even when the businesses didn't exist, even when I wasn't sure of like how I exactly wanted to do it, I knew that I wanted to be my own boss. I knew
Yeah.
that I wanted to build something. And I tried many a times before and like did little things that didn't work out. And then I tried another thing that didn't work out. So
Hmm.
just putting that out there. But my way to doula work was being in the medical field and being like, what is this? Um, and also being like, I want to be in this, but like, I don't know if I want to do it in this way.
Right.
Because I was like on my way to become like an RN and all that kind of stuff. And then I found doula work, long story less long. Became a prison birth project doula. Did that
Wow.
voluntarily for 2 years. And then started branching out on my own, moved to San Diego, started working, quit my job, which, I recommend. I love what I did, but I wouldn't recommend
Hmm.
the way that I did it.
Mm,
Because
good
I was just like,
distinction.
fuck it. I'm just going. I'm going
Right.
for it. I ain't really got no money, but I'm gonna have to figure it out, right? But
Yeah,
that for me was like that was my journey. So I'm not here to tell people like quit your job and just go do whatever, right?
totally.
Because there's hardships that comes with that
Hmm.
journey. But yeah, so like I would say that I have always known myself to be a caring person. I've always known myself to be someone who wanted to care for people.
Hmm.
Um, and like directly, like I love like the rawness and the like being there during those times and
Yeah.
holding that. But I also have always known that I wanted to be my own boss,
Hmm.
and I knew that for me to be happy I would have to feel free,
Yeah.
right? And like I would have to feel a level of liberation on a daily basis, which is why at the beginning, like I'm everywhere and nowhere at all,
Right.
right? Because like
Yeah.
to me, that's my form of like I can be wherever I want to be when I want to be
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's like true freedom. Yeah,
For
I
me,
love that. Yeah.
somebody else maybe not so much, but for
Right.
me, like the fact that even when I have like hard work days, being a CEO and all that kind of stuff, it's like on top of being black, on top of being queer, on top of being right, like there's
Mhm.
always these things that you're moving through, teams and feelings and all of that. But like I wake up every day and I'm like, I can be where I want to be as long as I take this laptop. Okay,
Mm.
fine, I can do this.
Yeah, that's amazing. Totally. Yeah, I can really relate to that. I feel similarly, and at the core of everything I've been doing for the last 15 or more years is that entrepreneurship, no matter what I've tried and what has failed, and
Hmm.
yeah, totally. I can
And it comes
relate
with
to that.
a bunch of failure, right? Before that one
Mhm.
thing. And like my
Yes.
best friend reminds me of that because I'll be like, oh, like whatever. Like maybe someone will say something about my work and I like tend to be like super humble. And she's like, no, remember, you were doing this prior to becoming a doula. We knew that.
Right.
Like, you
Yeah.
always wanted to be your own person. You always wanted to build teams. Like, but you found a
Mhm.
way to do it mixed with your passion.
Mhm.
And that's the like time it went like, oh, this makes sense.
Yes, like everything aligned. Yeah. Oh, that's
Hmm.
so cool. Yeah, and that can feel free and safe almost for some people, and then for some that can feel like panic inducing.
Exactly. And sometimes it's panic inducing for me too, right?
Right,
But
right.
it's just like which panic do I want to deal with,
Yes,
you know? Because I used to
yes.
actually have like literal panic attacks when I used to work in
Right.
corporate spaces. I would
Uh-huh.
literally have panic attacks in the office, like full out, middle of the
Mhm.
office, body shaking, and
Ugh,
that's where I was like, what?
yeah.
I have to do this a different way because my literal body is
Mhm.
telling me get out of here like
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
And also to answer your other question, as far as like being an expander of Black luxury,
Yes. Yeah.
um, one of the things that was like really central to my identity, obviously, is being a Black. I identify as a Black non-binary woman.
Mhm.
Um, and also, I know the perception of me is always going to be a femme Black woman, right?
Mhm.
And I also feel like in the world, historically, like people always look at us to do the most work, to have all the solutions, to
Yeah.
do all these things, to sacrifice, to not have as much. You know what I mean? Like it's like
Yes.
this idea, especially being dark skinned too. It's like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, like you're
Yeah.
supposed to be this way, right? And also, I
Right.
think there's even in social justice spaces, it's like the way that you prove of your commitment to this work is to always be in deficit,
Mm.
right? It's like
Mhm.
being deficit, show how hard you just show how much you don't have, show how you can't pay your rent, show how you whatever, and then how you still show up for the meet. Like
Right.
that is not sustainable,
Mm-mm.
one, and it's also not something that needs to be mirrored and
Mhm.
duplicated, right?
Yeah.
So one of the early commitments that I made to myself was like, I'm gonna pay myself first.
Mhm.
Like,
Yes.
right? I have to resource myself for many reasons. One, because I'm worthy of it, regardless of what I do.
Yes.
But two, specifically because of the work that I do.
Yes. Yeah.
That like I need to be resourced. So like, and I had to learn that through like being a doula and like, not charging enough and
Mhm.
not being able to pay my bills and going having mental breakdowns, but still showing up for births. And I was like, this
Ugh.
is not
Right.
something's not matching. Like, how can I tell my clients, take care of yourself, do this, have these boundaries, and I'm not
Yeah.
working in that way, right?
Right.
So for me, like really shifting that meant not only the financial piece of like paying myself, but it also was just like saying no to things,
Mhm.
being boundary in my time,
Mhm.
right? Being able to say like, I had to even switch like what opportunities would come my way. Like before I would just like jump on everything because it felt like I gotta do it all. I gotta do it all. Now I'm like,
Right.
I'm gonna be selective. What is in alignment with me? What I have capacity for? And then also giving myself the ability to change my mind.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Totally.
right. And give myself the ability, especially as a Black person, to like not have it all figured out, to not
Mhm.
know everything, to make mistakes, right? And also for sure giving myself luxurious experiences. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like luxurious experiences to me don't mean like you have to travel to Bali and be like, I'm
Mhm.
staying like, on the water or whatever. But it's
Mhm.
like the like I like to say like moving tea kettle slow. Like when you
Mm.
boil some water, it takes time, right?
Ugh.
and you gotta
Yes.
wait for it to, you gotta put it in the kettle, and you gotta put it on the stove, and you gotta wait for it to heat up, and like then it
Mhm.
starts boiling, but still not hot enough. And you gotta wait for it to like, you're like, okay, right? Because we're so used to like just putting our water in like an instant hotness or
Right.
Keurig, whatever. So for
Yeah.
me, it's like moving tea kettle slow, like being like, I'm not moving fast today.
Mm.
I'm gonna take the time to moisturize my skin. I'm gonna
Mhm.
take the time to close this laptop. Everything else can wait till tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So, but for me, I feel like because I am Black, because I do have the body that I have to put that forward
Mhm.
so that people know what to expect.
Yep.
So, like, if you email me, I'm like, hey, I respond when I respond.
Yep.
Um,
Yes,
like,
I love that. Yeah.
I'm not in a rush. Like,
Mhm.
if it's an emergency, feel free to hit me up. But like, it's just more so a very like statement that I want people to know. Like, you cannot come to me. One, you probably usually come to me for my labor, but you cannot
Mhm.
like command my labor at your like beck and call.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah.
Ugh, I love that so much. I love tea kettle slow. I'm gonna keep thinking about that, and I love that visual and what that feels like. Yeah, you can't rush it. You can't rush a tea kettle.
No, you could turn that. You could turn the fire up to hell, and you're
Right.
still gonna be sitting there.
Right.
It's just it's
Does
not
not
instant, you
matter.
know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so great. I love that so much. Yeah, and when I was emailing you for the podcast, I loved the response that I got, just like that automatic response that goes to
Hmm.
probably everyone that is just like,
Hmm.
I'll get back to you when it's in alignment,
Hmm.
no rush. Yeah, I loved that. And it's a good reminder for all of us. It's good modeling for everybody.
Because most things are not urgent. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, we feel that way, right? Because we're
yeah,
like in this society that like says like, which is why we don't have a whole bunch of tea kettles. Everybody's using the
right.
instant because it's like instead of taking literal 15 minutes to make your tea, you got to
Mhm.
take 2 minutes because you
Right.
got to get to the next thing, right?
Totally.
All the inventions and things that we have are very much like, how do we make this average everyday thing into like the smallest amount of time possible so
Right.
that you can do 50 things a day instead of 10, right?
Mhm.
So I think like it has to be this intention around like, I'm not going to move at the pace of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell people like, I move at the pace of me. Some
Yes.
days that's fast, some days not so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah,
So, do
exactly.
what we can.
Yes, exactly. And for you all who are not watching the video of this and just listening, Sabia has gorgeous, luxurious rainbow hair today,
Yeah.
which I think also fits.
Happy Pride.
Yes, happy Pride. So I am obsessed with your book. I've got it right here. Birthing Liberation: How Reproductive Justice Can Set Us Free. What an incredible book. The
Thank
whole thing
you.
is just like underlined and starred, and I've got notes in the margin. And
Thank you.
yeah, it's incredible. Um, I really do believe that this book holds the answers to so many problems that we're facing right now. As you say in the book, racism is a national health crisis. It absolutely is. Will you explain how liberating ourselves helps us do the work to liberate others?
Hmm. For sure. Thank you, one, for all your words about the book. It's like always so interesting to be like, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did you highlight? What came up
Yeah.
for you? You know what I mean? Because it's like you
Totally.
write this book in this very like private space, right?
Yes.
And then like
Yeah.
you bring it out to the world and you're like, okay, like how
Right.
are people going to perceive it? Like I'm not
Mhm.
really sure, right?
Mhm.
And there's also like also the I think the personal perception, even if it's not how I necessarily meant it, right?
Right.
Is like so important. It also adds to my knowledge as well. So
Mm.
I love just seeing how people take it in personally.
Mhm. Totally.
Um, but yeah, so liberation of self, right? Like, so I think when we think about all the chaos that is in the world,
Mhm.
from racism to transphobia to just bullshit,
Mhm.
um, there is this question when we detach ourselves, right? Because like when you're attached to it, it's very easy to be offended, right? Like, why
Mhm.
would you treat someone like this? Or why would you think this way of me? Or why would
Mhm.
you want to take away my rights, right? Like that's
Right.
of course,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But when you can, when you're able to detach yourself, right, and look at someone from a very bird's eye view, the question for that person who is attacking someone else's humanity really becomes, what does this person need,
Mm.
right? Because something is not being met here,
Wow.
right? And so, like, whether it is the person who is, white and doesn't like black people, or whatever it is, like,
Mhm.
racist towards black people, right? The question is like, what does this person need? And some of it may be they haven't been validated in their own experience throughout their life,
Right.
right? They probably hold some trauma with their
Mhm.
families, with their whoever, right? Like, maybe they need to feel valued. They don't understand value without power, right? Where
Yeah.
there's like these things, right, that come up.
Wow.
And so when I think about it that way, that I'm like, they are not liberated,
Yeah.
right? They themselves have not experienced liberation. And their
Mhm.
liberation and what that need is may look different. So maybe they need liberation from capitalism. Maybe they need liberation from family trauma. Maybe they
Yeah.
need liberation in their sexuality that they may not be open with, right? Like maybe
Totally.
they need,
Yes.
right? Like whatever these thoughts are, right? So like, and when I think about, if that person can get really what they needed and can be liberated, right, from like a soul level or whatever that
Mhm.
is needed, then they will have the space and capacity to hold space for other people's liberation,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
But it's hard to hold space and capacity for something that you've never experienced yourself,
Mhm.
right? So it
Yeah.
has to be like, liberation is a conscious decision, right? So
Mhm.
if you haven't made that conscious decision, and sometimes like it's conscious and it's something that you sometimes don't have a playbook for.
Right.
So that makes it even more complicated because you're,
Right.
'cause you're
Right.
like, okay, I know that I need these things. I know that I'm even making the choice to aim for my liberation, right? But like, there's no playbook on how I do that,
Right.
right? So, birth and liberation is a starting point for that playbook,
Mhm.
right? But if we can start that internal work, we just create so much more capacity for
Mhm.
difference, not even
Yeah.
just like sameness, but for difference. Like, oh, this person is different from me. Maybe we don't agree on this thing, right? But like, I have so much space and spaciousness in me because
Mhm.
like I have allowed myself to be spacious.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love that this affects all of us, everybody. We're so it's like privilege doesn't equal liberation. It's
Hmm.
like, even, for someone who holds a lot of privileges, doesn't necessarily mean they're liberated. It could mean the opposite. Like, we're all not benefiting from these systems.
Privilege does not equate
Yeah.
liberation, because privilege a lot of times, right, is like you become beholden to your privilege sometimes. Like you
Right.
become like, in order for me to maintain this privilege, I have to always
Yes.
stay in this certain box. Like, even
Right.
if this box doesn't apply to me anymore, or I'm starting to look at it
Mhm.
different, or it's not, I want to spread my box out a little bigger, I can't do
Mhm.
it because I'm going to lose this privilege, right? So like, even when we talk about whiteness in particular, of course, like,
Mhm.
people don't have a choice whether they come in the world white, right? But like, white people do have a choice on how they align in their whiteness,
Yeah.
right? And so like, when they align in a certain way and they get all these doors open, right? That's like great. But when they start to align in a more like community driven, anti-racist way,
Mhm.
that privilege box gets smaller because it's
Mm.
like, oh no,
Yes.
you're choosing to align your whiteness with this way, right? So I think
Right.
like, but that can be really scary for some people to think about. If I was to shift my identity, right, or shift the way
Mhm.
that people perceive me, what privileges that take away from me,
Right.
and that becomes the bigger issue. But the question also has to be with that is like, yeah, privilege may be lost, but also what will you gain, right? And
Mhm.
that gaining can be literal community, right? But also can be,
Yeah.
it can be gaining like integrity. Like,
Right.
it could be gaining,
Right.
like these things that are um like, they speak to when you die how you want to be remembered, right?
Mhm.
Like, they speak to like the
Yeah,
legacy that you're building, right? And
totally.
like, that goes further than oh, I was like, I had these big privileges and I could like, I don't know, get a private plane here in a second. That shit don't matter at the end.
Mhm.
Like what matters is like someone being like, yo, this person had integrity. This person is going to live in with me. This person changed my life. This person, and those are the things
Totally.
that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, what does a liberated person look like?
What do they look like? I mean, obviously, visually, they like look like whatever they look like, right?
Right, right.
But I would think, I would say it's not even necessarily what they look like, it's what they feel like,
Right. Right.
right? It's what they
Yeah.
feel
Ab-
like. And I think we
totally.
all have like come across a person, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter your sexuality, your gender, nothing.
Mhm.
We've all come across a person where they walk in a room and you're just like electromagnetically like, hi,
Yeah.
like you're just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, and again, it's not about like physical attraction or any of that,
Right.
right? It's a feeling that this person
Mm.
exudes that you're like, I
Yeah.
kind of want some of that, right?
Right.
And it doesn't, they haven't
Yeah.
had to speak a word to you. They haven't had
Mhm.
to like to whatever to like convince you, but there is a feeling that comes with someone who's liberated. And so one of the things actually that me and my partner were talking about last night, um, is it was because I've been like so I'm in currently in a chaplaincy class. So like being a
Mm.
chaplain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's like a great time. Love it.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And it's so many things. Like I like talk to a lot of people who are like chaplains who are like based in reproductive justice and they like help support people who have abortions and spirituality and like it's a whole thing.
Wow.
So cool. Love it, right?
Oh my gosh. So cool.
So any whoosies, I'm talking to my partner and I was last week in class, we were talking about shame, right?
Mm.
And we were talking about how shame is not necessarily when someone feels like embarrassed around something that they did, they feel embarrassed about who they are, right? Like
Mhm.
shame is a problem with who you are, not just the things that because you're not gonna embarrass someone. You're like, I fell in front of the people. Okay,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed. Let's not look
Yeah.
at me for a week, right? But like,
Right,
but
right.
shame is like, don't look at me ever, right? Because who I
Right.
am, right, is bringing
Mhm.
on feelings of like unworthiness or not, or just being fundamentally flawed, right?
Totally.
And so like this past weekend, me and my partner like went out. We like I met all her friends, and it was a whole little shindig. It was cute. We had a good
Mhm.
time.
Nice.
And we were kind of just like reflecting on it, and she was reflecting on like also her friends like liking me. They're like, "Oh my gosh, her energy is just I just love her energy," and da da da. And then my partner was like, "The thing that I love about you is like you have no shame,
Mm. Hmm.
right?" And I was like, "Yeah, like it's because that's deeper than like you're not embarrassed to go dance crazy in front of somebody, right? Like it's like who you are, you have no shame
Right.
about, right?"
Yes.
And she was like, "People are attracted to that." So
Totally.
that's why when you walk in a room, people are like, "Oh, this person don't hold any shame
Mm.
around
Mhm.
themselves." Like, and I tell people things. I'm like, I didn't have mental health struggles. I didn't did
Mhm.
this. I felt that. Maybe I wasn't a good
Right.
person at this point. I could have been a better person, right? But I don't hold shame around that,
Mm.
right?
Totally.
So I think like when I think about that, it's like that's how a liberated person feels. It doesn't mean
I
that they're
love that.
perfect. It don't mean that they have a hard day. They don't have hard times or
Right.
that they don't get frustrated or they're just like happy walking around, whatever. It's not that.
Right.
It's that even through their emotions, even through their process, they don't have shame.
Mm.
They have
Yeah.
transparency, right? They have
Yeah.
kindness to themselves and to others, right?
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
can look at something, they can look at something personally and also detach and look at it from a bird's eye view. I also
Mhm.
think liberated people can do that. You know what I mean? So like
Right.
without taking on the responsibility of fixing as well.
Right. Right.
So I think it's all about like
Wow.
how a person feels more than how they
Mhm.
look.
Yeah, absolutely. Ugh, that's so beautiful. And I'm thinking too, like, how differently a person would act coming from a place of no shame versus coming from a place of shame. Like, where you would just when you're coming from that place of shame, you have so much there that's not explored. And I feel like you would just act unconsciously and put that shame onto other people.
For sure. Exactly. Right. So it's like if you feel that, right, and you embody that, you start to replicate
Hmm.
that. And
Right.
now you're the asshole trying to shame people for their identities, for their
Right.
sexualities, for their race, for their whatever. Right. But really the
Hmm.
question is, what is it that you need?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you're you are lacking something that you're probably not
Hmm.
identifying. And that is resorting in this behavior of I have to be the most privileged or the most powerful, at least make myself seem that way.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Totally.
that's shame. That's
Hmm.
internalized shame turned outward.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Um, in your book, you encourage the reader to embody our difficult feelings as we read about the traumatic birth story of Rena, whose story is so tragically common in our country. You encourage us to sit with our discomfort and let it move through our body. I found this practice to be incredibly profound and at first really scary. Will you explain why you want readers to do this as we read your book?
Yeah. So everything is about feeling, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
our brains are these like super wired things that, especially if you have anxiety and shit, like you're just like your brain's like, I think about this way and I say this way and I move through that and did I really feel that way and is this like right? Like it's all this
Mm-hmm.
logic trying to like make its place.
Yeah.
But one thing about our bodies is that they ain't with none of that. They're like, if you think about your body as like a machine that is
Mm-hmm.
like functioning off of a knowing, not functioning off of logic, if that makes sense.
Right.
Right? So like our bodies using our senses, right? Our
Mhm.
eyesight, our smell, our whatever can let you know early on, like, yeah, not so much, right? And we all have been in that
Mhm.
situation where you're like, something was just off.
Right.
My body was just like, mm-mm, right? And then later
Mhm.
on, you're like,
Yes.
damn it. If I would have just listened
Yeah.
to that, right? If I had just learned what that messaging was,
Right.
then I would have been able to maybe move a little bit different, a little bit better, right? So
Mhm.
we have to start being attuned to our bodies because the body be knowing, right? And I
Mhm.
think part of it though is like a lot of us, and I think it's human nature, we want to attune to the good feelings that our body brings, right? We're like, I want to
Sure.
attune to pleasure and sex and
Yeah.
like whatever the case is, and those things are good, right? But also
Mhm.
like everything has to be balanced, so you also need to attune
Mhm.
to the other things, right? So you need to attune to the grief and the
Mhm.
sadness and the anger and how that lives in your body, because if you're not bringing that awareness, it's going to live there and continue to stay there, and now you're going to
Yeah.
have you have the health issues or you have this or you have that, right? So it's
Right.
important for us to like be able to build a capacity to feel all of our feelings in our bodies, and also know that when we do that, we build a capacity for more humanity, right? Build the
Mm.
capacity to actually get through something versus saying like,
Yeah.
wait, this is uncomfortable. I need to move to the next thing, right? Like,
Right.
what does it feel like to just get through an emotional loop? I was
Yeah.
angry. I let the anger hit its highest and then it came down, right? And it's something
Mhm.
about like feeling that, even like as a person who struggles with anxiety,
Mhm.
sometimes like my like mantra when I'm feeling anxious is just like, this is also going to come down eventually. Right?
Mhm.
So it teaches me
Right.
like to trust my body as well in those moments of like tension and anxiety and worry or grief or whatever, just being like, yo, my body is doing this to heal me. Right. And I think
Mhm.
we have to like move away from like, oh, if I'm feeling a bad feeling, I'm trying to like I'm internalizing something negative. And it's like, no, your body's telling you feel it so you can heal it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I think like it's important for us to like become more attuned to that.
Mhm.
Um and it's important for us to just like be able to see that in others as well, right?
Yeah.
And to like start to push that to our children, right? Start to push that
Mm.
to our communities, so that we can feel a moment of anger when someone said anything, and then we can actually move to the resolution,
Right.
right? Like we don't have to be angry for the next 20 years.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
right? And like that's the things that I want people to be able to move through. Like if I can move through that on my own, then that would bring my capacity to have conversations with community members, even in disagreement.
Yes.
right? And I think a lot
Yep.
of people just want to be held even in disagreement, whether they say it or not,
Mm.
right? And I think
Mhm.
so. One of the things also I was talking about, me and my partner were talking about, like, when it comes to emotions,
Mhm.
how there's like a lot of us have been taught that if you were to actually be in your emotion and to actually express your emotion, right? Not in a violent way or whatever the case is, but
Sure.
that like you're now like there's like love taken away from you because of your because you actually fully expressing that emotion versus saying like, oh, I'm fine, or I can handle it, or whatever, you know what I mean? So I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't want to feel that way. I want to feel like I can do my whole thing, feel it in my
Right.
body, and still know that at the end of the day, my people are still standing there with me, right? And I
Yeah.
think all of that is like vulnerability, to be like, oh, I'm going to
Mhm.
go through this thing. Are you still going to be here?
Yeah.
And we need more of that. Those, I
Totally.
think we all need that.
Yes. Yeah. That expanding our capacity to feel that discomfort and to not run away.
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
stop holding on to that, because it comes out either way, right? Like when we're looking at people who are so
Mhm.
reactive to like whatever cause it is, it's just like, oh, I wish I would just finish our emotional loops. I wish I would
Right.
just like,
Right.
because then after the
Yeah.
emotional loop, then we can talk about the real stuff here. But we can't even talk
Yes.
about the real stuff because you're so stuck in your trauma response that like we
Yes.
can't get to none of the real conversation.
Yep. Yep.
And you don't even
That's
know what you're
totally
defending
true.
anymore. You don't know what
Yeah.
you're defending anymore. You just it don't even make sense. You're just saying shit out your mouth.
Right.
Like,
Right. So true.
you know what I mean? Like even when you look at like
Yes.
all the like I don't know like Trump stuff or whoever the case is, and people are like literally they will tell them like these are the facts. What you're saying is not true, and they're like nope because right they're just in fight mode
Right. Yeah.
because they're not
Totally.
finishing what they need to finish. So then we can get to a point of being grounded and being like okay now
Mhm.
let's talk about what we need to talk about.
Yes, totally. I had this experience the other night and I felt like it was as a result of reading your book and having you walk me through that
Hmm.
process. And I was feeling really angry. And then I literally felt my energy or my body like expand to be bigger to hold that anger. So it didn't have to I didn't feel like I had to like panic and let it out. Do you know what I mean? Like I felt like, okay, I can actually hold this. Like I can actually grow bigger to
Hmm.
to go around this anger and hold it and like sit with it. And like
Yeah.
that was huge for me.
And also, like, what is it telling me,
Yeah.
right? I can listen to the messages as to what it's telling me,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's important because our emotions do tell us
Yes.
things,
Yeah.
right? Like our feelings, our body are they're telling us
Mhm.
things, but like sometimes it's hard to even interpret that message when your aim is to get out of
Totally.
it.
Totally.
Right? I can't feel this, right? I have to shut it down. I have to move to the next thing, and your body's like, "Sis, I'm trying to tell you
Right.
something.
Right.
Listen to what I'm trying to tell you so that next time you won't be mad about this, and next time you'll not be engaged with this type of person, or
Mhm.
next time you'll realize that this organization or place is not for you,
Yep.
right? Like there's clear messages that like we can
Mhm.
learn if we build the
Mhm.
capacity to sit and listen.
Totally.
And to sit and listen, we have to be
Yep.
with.
Yep. And I think that's where the action is. Like when you can get to that other side of that emotion and
Hmm.
then you can take action. Yeah, which is what we need to be
Hmm.
doing. Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
can't ever get to the other side of it and we stay stuck in it. All we do is argue.
Right.
All we
Right.
do is like be in the same cycle. No, nothing
Totally.
gets done, right? And like
Yeah.
part of my like inspiration for writing Birth and Liberation was just like I want to see true action.
Mhm.
Like
Yes. Yes.
people get so frustrated with like topics and whatever, but I'm like it's so like not that there's anything wrong with talking, but it's so repetitive
Mhm.
and redundant that I'm like, man, all that time we could have actually been doing something.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's what I loved most about your book is that it was very there was lots of clear action steps and templates and ideas like okay, now this is what we would do. Like let's go do it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Please
exactly.
and thank you.
Yes, yes. I also thought it was so interesting how you pointed out the layers of trauma experienced by everyone involved in Rena's story. So, this is
Hmm.
one of the central stories that you tell in the book, including the white cis male doctor. And I just, when I first read the story, of course, I wasn't thinking at all about his trauma.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
will you talk about how multiple people's unprocessed trauma can affect a situation?
Yes, for sure. So in the book, I open with a story that is all very common,
Mm-hmm.
um, about a black parent, cis woman parent, moving through her birthing process, and ultimately ending up dying,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a way that could have been avoided. And like I said, it's a story of many black
Yeah.
parents. And, like for me, one of the things I think about often is like racism and its effects and its trauma is very clear, to like it's clear when it comes to like people of color,
Mm-hmm.
like very clear.
Mm-hmm.
And if I mean, some people would say maybe not, right? It could be in denial, but
Sure.
like
Right.
in general, it's very clear. But I often think about too, like what is the other side of this? And through my work of like literally being in classes, talking about this work, doing things in person, when I started doing that work, I didn't necessarily like expect it, but I started to see how racism showed up for white people,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and it looked different.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't that it wasn't there; it just looked different,
Interesting.
right? So when I realized that, I was like, "Huh, okay."
Yeah.
So when I was writing the book and I was writing that story, for me, it was important to name the identities of every character and also to name what they may be moving through.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, because again, racism and all of that, like all of it is a trauma for all of us, right? But it all comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
So I wanted to name those pieces because I think it's important to, yes, like uplift BIPOC folks for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and to keep a full holistic perspective on what it looks like to be in an experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is full of different people and different characters who are moving through different thoughts and different histories and
Right.
different feelings and different, right?
Yeah.
So it was important for me to name that because I think, like in my work as a birth worker, like, it is easy to just like kind of demonize doctors or to
Mm-hmm.
demonize, like to be
Yes.
like, this person is negative. And I'm like, don't get me wrong. Okay, yes, some doctors, right?
Right.
But also like some doulas too,
For sure.
right? Like I know doulas where I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know, right? So, so I think it's just like humanizing,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
Not giving an excuse or
Mm-hmm.
giving any of that. But even when I wrote the book too, I wanted it to be something that could be read by a doctor, by a
Mm-hmm.
nurse, by a doula, by a parent, right?
Yes.
And in order for that to happen, I was like, they have to see themselves reflected in this space,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not to give like, and it's not to give anyone an excuse,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's to be factual around like people are moving through things all the time. And even if you're moving through those things, this is your role and what you need to do
Right.
in regard to that.
Yep.
So it was important for me to name all of that.
Totally. I thought that was really just so profound to think about it from all of those angles. I was like, wow, I wouldn't have thought that. It was so surprising to me.
Yeah. We're all here being human,
Yes, exactly.
interacting with each other, trying to do our best, but we all got some things, got
Yes,
some things.
exactly. Um, you describe succinctly in your book how Black birthing people are usually blamed for their outcomes. And I see this all the time, like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes, for example, instead of the
Hmm.
medical system or the providers. But studies have now shown that these sometimes life threatening birthing outcomes are a direct effect of a phenomenon called weathering. Will you explain that concept of weathering, what it means?
Yes, yes. So, at its simplest ways of defining it is, um, Black people and people of color, but I'll speak to Black people right now because I am Black.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we talk about racism isn't something that like you just experience once a day because you went to work and someone says something like negative to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's also just all consuming,
Yeah.
right? right? It's like it's in the interactions. Like when I go outside like I live near Atlanta now. So I moved out of San Diego. I was living there for 3 years. I moved out of San Diego because I was like, I just need to see more Black people, right?
Yes.
I need to, like, nervous system wise,
Right.
like, see more Black people. Like I need
Mhm.
to just, when I walk outside the door, I'm already thinking I'm Black. I'm walking outside my house,
Mhm.
don't know what's gonna happen today, right?
Totally.
But I was like, for my nervous system, I need to see more Black and brown people so that my nervous system and my body can feel a bit safer,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Um, so there's like a thing that Black people have to think about.
Mhm.
You have to think about, watching TV, imagery, things that come across the TV. You have to think about the news, the crime, the this, the that, right?
Yep.
You have to think about the inequities in the systems that you
Mhm.
work in, the place that you educate yourself, the people where you get your healthcare access. You have to think about, depending on what neighborhoods you are living in, are you living in a food desert? Do you have quality, affordable food in your area?
Mhm.
Right? You have to think about police. Who's the police in your area?
Yeah.
What's going on? What's the vibe?
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like,
Totally.
and these are things you just think about for yourself. That's not including your children,
Yes.
your family,
Mhm.
your friends, your community, right? It's like, so we think about that, right?
Mhm.
Microaggressions, explicit racism, implicit racism, like
Mhm.
all these things, there is a weathering because your body is functioning on cortisol at a high level all the time,
Right.
right? Like consistently, there's a level of cortisol going through your body. And when you have like stress hormones and stress on your body 24/7, it impacts the literal functioning of your body.
Mhm.
So your endocrine system and your cardiovascular system and all these things. Like when we talk about Black people having heart attacks at young ages, like
Yeah.
there's a reason for that,
Totally.
right? Like
Right.
when we talk about these things, like there is a weathering that is happening to the body
Mhm.
at a very early age. And it's not just like when you become an adult either,
Right.
right? It's even like, there's like, Push Out, the book Push Out, like talking about kids being, Black girls being criminalized as soon as they enter the school system at 5 years old,
Ugh. Yeah.
right? So like this is not like just something that's like, oh, when you become an adult and you start working and you see this and you see that, right? It's like, no, it's impacting our kids.
Right. Right.
And even as a newborn, you as a Black person, you have a higher chance of dying in your first year of death, in your first year of life as a newborn.
Right.
So it's like soon as you come out the womb,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's some level of stress that's being that's being put on your body,
Mhm.
and you're supposed to just live life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um I love how you describe in your book the difference between culturally competent versus culturally humble healthcare. I just love that concept, that term. Will you explain the difference between these two concepts and which one we want to aspire to as healthcare providers and community
Yes,
workers?
yes. So cultural competence is kind of like a first step, if you will.
Mhm.
But cultural competence is kind of like the big thing about it is that it's like an endpoint. It's like, oh, you've been around Black people, you now know how their culture operates,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And it's like, okay. And that's when you get people that come to you like, oh yeah, you're celebrating Kwanzaa. And you're like, maybe I'm not.
Right. Oh my god.
I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're just like,
Uh,
okay,
yeah.
not quite.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, so that's like a cultural competence kind of question. Like you're
Mhm.
celebrating Kwanzaa, what are you doing,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because you're Black, so
Right.
that clearly has to be your thing.
Yeah.
And so cultural humility, it says like this thing is always ongoing,
Mhm.
right? So it means it also says like there is that people are not monolithic.
Yeah.
So even if you are in relationship with a Black community, that don't mean that they're the same as other Black community and the other Black community,
Mhm.
right? So to take that first example, instead of saying like you're going to celebrate Kwanzaa, what are you doing? It would be like, what holidays do you celebrate,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's just that simple to be humble of being like,
Mhm.
maybe I do have some information, maybe I've learned some things,
Mhm.
right? But also, I'm just not going to assume that this is what it is because that's the Black thing to do,
Right.
right? So it's important to come with that openness, because once we start to think that we're culturally competent, we start to like really close our lens, like our glasses, right? We can't see shit because we're like, oh, this person does this person does that. There's assumptions,
Yeah.
right? Like even in healthcare, there's
Mhm.
assumptions. So like I actually was thinking about this other day, couple years ago, because I have fibromyalgia and I have all these pain conditions.
Mhm.
And I had went to like a like holistic practitioner or whoever, and she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna test you for Lyme disease." She's like, "Because I haven't been to a neurologist. I've been to a whole bunch of things, you know."
Mhm.
And she was like, "Have anybody ever tested you for Lyme disease?" And I was like, "No, no, not ever." And I've been tested for a bunch of things,
Right.
right? And so she was like, "Okay." So we did the Lyme disease test, and it came back positive. Like I had like a super tick.
Ugh.
Okay, I had all different types of. It was just a mess, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh gosh.
any whoosies, I really thought about that because I was like, "Yo, not one time did someone say, 'Hey, do you think you could have been bit by a tick? Did you go camping? Did you?'"
Right.
You know,
Right.
like
Yeah.
those kind of like outdoorsy questions. And I was like, and I'm pretty sure it's because I'm Black and
Right.
I've always lived in like a city.
Right.
And I was like, so I think the assumption has all like she wouldn't. There's no reason to test her for Lyme disease, right?
Right.
But
Right.
that's like cultural competent thinking around
Mhm.
like I'm a monolith. I'm Black. I live in a city. I don't go camping. I don't do things in nature because I'm a city girl. Whatever case is,
Totally.
versus being like culturally humble, which is like let's open up this question because I don't know who you are.
Mhm. Exactly.
Did you go camping?
Yeah.
Did you whatever? And I'm like, actually, I do love spending time in nature.
Mhm.
It's just like, let's get you tested for Lyme and came
Right.
back positive.
Ugh. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What a difference those two things are.
Hmm. Hmm. And literally life saving.
Yes, literally life-saving. Yeah.
If we just like stop thinking about people as a monolith and
Mhm.
just be like, okay, I see this identity in my, I'm naturally as a human, I'm going to have some type of judgment
Mhm.
around whatever identity I see. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that this is like the all knowing, right? Like I just have to ask questions that I would ask to anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
Because people are individuals at the end
Right.
of the day.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of folks stop at culturally competent healthcare, but
Hmm.
we need to keep going to culturally
Hmm.
humble. Yeah, exactly.
And really ask yourself, like, what do I ask one client and don't ask the other?
Yes.
Why do
Yes.
I ask them that and not ask the other?
Yep.
Right? Like, or why do I remember like I forgot who I was talking to, one of my doula friends, and they were like, they were in the birth room with one of their clients, the birth room clients in their room were Black.
Mhm.
And then next door was like a white patient, whatever, having their baby.
Mhm.
And every time the nurse would come into the Black people's room, she was white. She'd be like, "Hey, girl," da 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 da, like trying to like do that
Oh
whole thing.
gosh, right. Ugh.
And everybody's like, "We don't even talk like that." So,
Right.
but again,
Ugh.
culturally competent,
Yeah.
these assumptions, this monolithic view versus like
Mhm.
cultural humility. I'm just gonna treat everyone the same, ask the same questions, and like
Right.
see who you are beyond what I see in front of my face.
Right. Exactly. Ugh, yeah, that's so cringy. Oh god. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just yeah, treat everyone the same that and then explore who each individual is.
Hmm.
Yeah, and without assumptions. Yeah, question your assumptions. Exactly.
For sure.
Um, Changing systems feels so daunting, but as you point out in your book, systems are just communities of people. I loved that. I underlined it, like, and starred it. I was like, "Oh, that's so true. That's so true." What are some steps that we can take to make systemic changes to center the most marginalized among us, and how does that approach benefit everyone?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it starts from education. I think, which is why, like in the book, I go into like the history
Mhm.
of reproductive health,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of times, like we see things that we don't like to see and don't want to see, and we do things that have already been done,
Mhm.
and like we don't go into like what has been done or what can I learn from this, right? So like,
Mhm.
so make sure we're not just doing the same thing over and over, just new iterations of it.
Right.
So that's like history is really important, knowing where you
Yeah.
came from to know where we are now and why
Mhm.
those things exist.
Yeah.
I think the next thing that we, want to aim to do, is to really diversify our community, right? And
Mhm.
what I mean by that is, of course, like I'm down with my people. You get what I'm saying? And and in the last few years, I've diversified my community in different spaces. So I do talk
Mm.
to the white cis man who's privileged and well off. I do talk to, a person who's, quote unquote low income and what I talk to these different people because to understand, to really have a wide perspective, you have to be able
Mhm.
to talk to different people. And it's things that I
Totally.
learn from people who are here, there, and everywhere.
Mhm.
Right? Like, and it's not about their education, they got these degrees. Like, it's not about that. It's like
Mhm.
people have different information that help me put pieces together so that I can get beyond just my one view of
Yeah.
what needs to happen. And they also empower me with information I didn't know. I'm like,
Mm.
oh, this thing could be really helpful to this thing over here.
Right.
Right. And I think another thing that we have to kind of be, we have to work on being in collaboration,
Mhm.
um, authentically. And what I mean by that is there's 10 billion issues right now,
Yeah.
right? Like, for example, like, I mean, it's just 10 billion issues, right? But like in this current moment, always, I mean, my work is always dedicated to like Black perinatal health disparities.
Mhm.
And I know at this current moment, I need to be talking about trans rights.
Right. Yep.
I'm not a trans person,
Mhm.
but it don't take much to see that people are trying to fuck up their lives, right?
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that my main issues or that something that's connected to me isn't important, but
Mhm.
I can see when something needs a little boost and some
Yeah.
support. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Like, and it
Totally.
doesn't mean that especially because I'm not connected, like I don't identify that way. It's even more reason why I should be over there.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think like we have to like come together in collaboration and say like, yo, what is needed right now? What do
Mhm.
we consistently keep working on? What does that consistent work look on? But also what needs that push right
Yeah.
now? What needs that SOS right now?
Mhm.
Um, and like that to me is really community
Mhm.
being like, I'm not a trans person, but I'm not blind.
Right.
Like
Right.
I see right now that there's a genocide happening with y'all. And so what
Yeah.
you need me to do?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, when trans people are impacted in their rights around their bodily autonomy and their
Mhm.
health care and their whatever, right? That means that same shit can happen to me.
Exactly.
Once we
Yeah.
start in one section of being like pushing people back, once that
Mhm.
section is gone, we come into the next one,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
so
Yep.
it's like we have to be able to like see that like interconnection,
Mhm.
even with the things that maybe are not directly connected to our identities.
Totally. Totally. Yep. And if we can work that out for the most marginalized, yeah, then that has that ripple effect to everyone
Mm-hmm.
else. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The wins and the losses, right? Like when we win, the
Right.
most marginalized, it's a benefit to everyone. When
Yep.
we lose,
Yep.
it's also a loss to everyone.
Exactly. Yes.
Like it
Totally.
doesn't not impact just because you're not in that group. No, that's
Right.
it's going to impact you at some point.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Do you have any advice for queer, trans, or non-binary, bi-PGM, or BIPOC who are currently or who will soon navigate the reproductive healthcare system on their fertility journey?
Yes, 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 yes. One, do your research.
Mm-hmm.
Do your research. Don't feel afraid to call many fertility clinics and ask
Mm-hmm.
many questions about, hey, how's this going? What do you do about this? Blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. Like, do that research.
Yeah.
Be clear about what's important to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, is it clear? Is it most important that your physician is someone who has a similar identity to you, right? Or is it more important that this place is local and they have the services, right? Like,
Mhm.
do you mind being in a space where you might have to provide some education, or do you want to be in a space where they know everything and you don't have to provide any education?
Mhm.
Um, where is this clinic located? Is that somewhere where you want to be? Does it feel safe to walk outside of that clinic, right?
Right.
Are you going to feel safe inside of the clinic? Are you going to be like the only like person that's not binary in this place, right? Like,
Mhm. Right.
so just thinking about like those kind of like things, and being clear about what that looks like for you.
Mhm.
And then the next thing I would say is like really aiming in your education process to look for community,
Mhm.
whether it's a Facebook group or just something that you can, like a Reddit group, just something that you're like, okay, I can go to this place and ask a question, or I can read. Because I think sometimes when you're moving through, it can feel so isolated. Like I'm the only one moving through this, especially if your immediate family is not like of your identities and not of your experience.
Totally.
It can feel very, very isolating. So even if it's a place where you can read, like, oh, other people are going through this too, or
Mhm.
here's a place where I can ask a question, or like anything like that, I think is
Yeah.
super helpful. And I'll also suggest this
Oh,
book,
yes. Yes.
Baby Making for Everybody
Mhm.
by Ray and Maria.
Totally.
So
And I
yeah,
just
family
had those.
building and fertility.
Yes. I just had those 2 on the podcast. So if y'all haven't heard the
Yay!
episode, go back and listen. It's a few episodes ago. Yeah.
Yes, so I also would suggest that.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great one.
And the other thing I
Totally.
would say too,
Yeah.
last but not least, do your research on the financial pieces.
Mm. Mhm.
Know
Yes.
know what you may be looking forward to. Know your options,
Mhm.
because that can really lead you to know like what you want to really do versus
Mhm.
what you thought you wanted to do.
Right. Right.
Like, and have a limit too. Like, not for nothing, I've seen people like go in a lot of debt over
Yeah.
family building.
Yep.
Um, and not that I think that's a bad thing, but I do think that there can be sometimes when you go over a certain limit, whatever
Right.
that limit is for you, it can become like, I enjoy my family, but I'm always thinking about this debt, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
be clear about what is your financial limits. At what
Mhm.
point do we shift to something else? At what point do we, like,
Yeah.
what point do we pause and build up some more resource? Like,
Mhm.
things like that, because I think for anybody, any parent, it's kind of could be like, oh, I love this baby and I have $100,000 in debt, and like, what the fuck,
Yes. Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, that's a huge piece of it. Also, I think I spoke over you while you were reading the title of that book. Will you read it one more time?
Oh yeah, baby making for everybody, family building and fertility for LGBTQ plus and solo parents.
Wonderful. And it's by Ray Racklin and Maria Goodman. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yay. So, lastly, how can people find you, support you, buy all your things? If you have any, upcoming events, offerings, anything.
Yes. So the easiest way to find all that is going on with me is to go to my website, sabiawade.com. On there, you'll like get a pop up to join my Substack, which is Birth News Harris newsletter, where I post weekly with like different written format meditations, affirmations, community check ins, whatever is going on in my world. Other
Mhm.
like mini podcasts on there with different people. And then, yeah, I mean, you can always follow my Instagram, Sabia Wade. You can always, anything that pops up that Sabia Wade and you want to follow it, please feel free. But I would say my my newsletter is like the best way to be like really integrated into what's going on with me.
Okay. Oh, that sounds amazing. I will be going to sign up for that right now as soon as we hop off.
Yeah, it's
And
a
if you
fun
have,
time.
yeah, it sounds amazing. So dynamic. And for anyone who has not checked out your book yet, please go buy Sabia's book. It is
Yep,
incredible.
and it's available everywhere, and it's
Hmm.
in audio as well.
Oh, nice. Did you do the
Um,
audio?
I did not. I
Okay.
had a very lovely narrator named Smika who did it.
Nice.
Um, and we thank her for her work.
Nice. Yeah.
Recording a book can be a lot. So I'm like,
I
maybe the
can't
next
imagine.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the next one. But yeah, so it's available in audio as well.
Oh, great. Okay, that's good to know. Cool. All right. Well, I've kept you long enough. Thank you so much, Sabia, for being here today. I learned so much, as I always do, from you, and we're
Thank
just so grateful
you.
to have you here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.